Good morning, Jim and Kelly here again. I posted a bunch of CD videos about viruses and how they don't cause anything and they're just poison. So now I've got one video I'm going to explain to you what the true cause of disease is. So if you're in the general public, you want to listen to this 23 minutes. It may change your life. It may save you from a lifetime of drugging and more drugging and more drugging and eventually death at the hands of your medical doctor. So take a listen to Toxemia, the cause of all disease, by experts, real experts, that were suppressed.
Hi, this is Jim O'Kelly, your healthologist. On our other CD, we talked about germs not being the cause of disease. We proved by logic and common sense that a germ is not, cannot, and never will be the cause of a disease. So now, on this CD recording, we're going to promote and explain the theory of toxemia, which people like Dr. John Tilden said was the cause of all disease. So reading from Dr. Herbert Shelton, he asks the question, what is the cause of disease? And he answers it, toxemia. And then he says, well, what causes toxemia? And he answers that, inhibited elimination. And he says, well, what inhibits elimination? And he says, enervation. And he says, what causes enervation? A mode or method of living that uses up nerve force in excess. And he says, what constitutes the removal of such a series of causes? And he says, first, toxemia must be eliminated. Then the nerve energy must be restored to normal. And finally, the method of living must be corrected. So how, he asks, is toxemia eliminated? By the organs of elimination when they are supplied with sufficient functioning power to do the task. And how is this supplied, he says? First, by stopping all nerve leaks, and then by rest. He says treatments and drugs do not supply rest. They stimulate and further innervate. Further innervation places an added check upon elimination and increases the toxemia. They may and often do temporarily palliate a symptom, but they cannot restore health. So how is normal nerve energy restored? By the same process of stopping all nerve leaks and resting for recuperation. And he says, finally, what are nerve leaks? He says it's all needless and wasteful expenditures of nervous energy. So then he says, if you remove the cause of impairment of health, the forces of the body will restore health. Now that's quite a mouthful, and it's going to take reading a few times to even to begin to try to understand that. It certainly did for me. But essentially what he's saying is that the body gets poisoned. When it gets poisoned, due to buildup of toxemia in the system, that inhibits the elimination of the poison. And what inhibits that elimination is because the organs get tired or weak because of the toxemia. And when he says what causes that, it's simply the method of living that uses up nerve force being the life force. Now we're going to give you some quotes from Dr. Tilden himself, who originated this philosophy or theory of toxemia as being the cause of all disease. All right, I'm going to read to you directly from Dr. Tilden's book, What is Toxemia? He says the word toxemia carries its own meaning, namely, toxin in the blood. He then defines Gould's medical dictionary this way: blood poisoning, a condition in which the blood contains poisonous products produced by the body's cells. The so-called diseases are merely symptom complexes of a constitutional toxemic state. They are the effects of the toxin, the waste product of metabolism. It's retained in the blood, causing a crisis or a so-called disease. It's forced self-elimination of the body, of its poisons. That man is heir to disease, that there are several hundred diseases created especially by an all-wise and loving God just to punish him from the cradle to the grave, is an absurd superstition, a sort of modern mythology, and a legitimate offspring of the ancient mythologies. The science of medicine, Dr. Tilden says, is a disjointed, illogical conglomeration of isolated facts and fancies without a semblance of philosophical unity. Even the only hypothesis that has had any apparent logical connectivity, the germ theory, has no more philosophical connection with health and disease than a brick thrown through a window has to do with the construction of the building. Germs have no physiological connection with the causation of disease and cannot be considered as more than an incident in disease. He goes on to say, there is no disease per se. What is called disease is impaired health and is brought on from one retention of waste products in the blood. These waste products are called toxins, and in normal and limited amounts are natural and give a needed stimulation. But like all stimulants, when an excessive amount is retained in the system, they create overstimulation, resulting in innervation or toxemia. Every so-called disease is a crisis of toxemia, which means that toxin has accumulated in the blood above the toleration point. And the crisis, the so-called disease, call it cold, flu, pneumonia, headache, is a vicarious elimination. Nature is endeavoring to rid the body of toxin. In a few words, without toxemia, there can be no disease. The waste product of metabolism is toxic, and the only reason why we are not poisoned by it is because it is removed from the organism as fast as it is produced. The toxin is retained in the blood only when there is a checking of elimination. What is the cause of the checking? When we have normal nerve energy, organic functioning is normal. Innervation causes a checking of elimination. The cause of all so-called diseases is found. Innervation checks elimination of the waste product of metabolism. Retention of metabolic toxin, the first and only cause of disease. Now, the way that I understand that is simply this. We eat too much food, the wrong foods, we don't exercise, we don't live a right lifestyle. Therefore, this toxin or waste products of the body build up in our cells and in our tissues and our organs. When they do that, the elimination process of the human body can't work as efficiently, and so therefore it's checked and the poison continues to build up. This is created by an innervation of the entire body, the organs that are weak, and this comes from a weakened and impaired nervous system, which is the seat really of all energy that we have in the human body. So the way to do that, the way to eliminate the poison, he's going to explain, or one of these other doctors are going to explain in just a few minutes. But first of all, we're going to turn back to Dr. Tilden's next book, of which he wrote, called Toxemia Explained. And he says this, the proper way to study disease is to study health. And by the way, folks, that's why I call me a healthologist, and you can be one too. In fact, you are one right now. But the way to study disease is to study health, and every influence favorable or not to its continuance. Disease is perverted health. Any influence that lowers nerve energy becomes disease producing. Disease cannot be its own cause, neither can it be its own cure, and certainly not its own prevention. There is no hope that medical science will ever be a science, for the whole structure is built around the idea that there is an object, disease, that can be cured when the right drug, remedy, cure is found. It has been remarked above that one of the chief causes of the unscientific nature of medicine and the anti-scientific character of doctors lies in their innate credulity and inability to think independently. This contention is supported by the report on the intelligence of physicians recently published by the National Research Council. They are found by more or less trustworthy psychologic tests to be the lowest in intelligence of all professional men, excepting only dentists and horse doctors. Excuse me, I have to tell you something. Most of you will probably not believe what he just said, but as someone who's dealt with doctors for the last 40 years when my daughter was sick and dealing with these people in Chicago and all over the country, I can believe that real quick. These people are like other people in school that just memorize and test, and do not really understand, what they're even doing in their profession, except the ones that do, and they're the bad guys. But he goes on to say, and here's a question for those of you that say, well, why do 6 people get chicken pox or 10 get a cold or whatever at the same time? And he says, all epidemic diseases are wholesale food poisoning among people who are pronouncedly innervated and toxemic. So you see, if you have 3 people in your family of 6 that have a cold, you simply ask yourself, why didn't the other 3 get the cold? Because obviously their body wasn't in a state of toxemia like Dr. Tilden is talking about. But what he also says is this: dissatisfaction and overworked emotions are innervated. Worry, fear, grief, anger, passion, temper, overjoy, depression, dissatisfaction, self-pity, pride, envy, jealousy, and gossip, lying, dishonesty, failing to meet obligations and appointments, taking advantage of misunderstandings, abusing the credulity of friends, abusing the confidence of those who confide in us, all innervate and in time build incurable diseases. You can probably tell my voice is scratchy right now. I have symptoms of a cold, but I want to tell you something. I've been under a lot of pressure the last 6 months due to a personal problem, and I know that that's finally caught up with me now, and I understand what the cause is, so I understand how to fix it also. But let's go on to the next doctor, Dr. Russell Thackeray Troll, who was really one of the most brilliant men, thinkers of all kinds, no matter what profession. But he says in his book, The True Healing Art, there are, aside from accidents, mechanical injuries, but 2 sources of disease in the world, viz., poisons or impurities taken into the system from without, and defeat or waste matters retained. In either case, the result is obstruction. These extraneous particles are the causes of disease, and aside from mental impressions and bodily injuries, the only causes. He says, and what is this mysterious thing, disease? Simply the effort to remove obstructing material from the body and to repair damages. Disease is a process of purification. It is a remedial action. It is a vital struggle to overcome obstructions and to keep the channels of the circulation free. To give drugs is adding to the causes of disease, for drugs always produce disease. To give drugs is to give the living system more work to do. Medical schools and books teach that medicines, which are dead, inert, and inorganic substances, act on the living system. Nature teaches the contrary, that the living system acts on the medicine. All nature is marvelously simple when we understand it. All the functions of vitality may be resolved in 2 sets of processes. One transforms the elements of food into tissue and throws off the waste matters. This is health, physiology. The other expels foreign substances and repairs damages. This is disease, pathology. Is this not all plain enough? Now here is another article by Dr. Troll that came out of the History of Natural Hygiene. Troll says, and it says this: Troll flourished about 100 years ago, and in his time drugging was the order of the day. The average physician thought of no other form of treatment, and the public had grown so used to the idea that health could be bought in a bottle that it never occurred to them that any other form of treatment was possible. Symptoms of a so-called disease were treated as the disease itself, and the main object of treatment was to smother and reduce those symptoms. Against this idea, Troll protested strongly. He insisted that practically all diseases were in reality processes of cure, efforts on the part of nature to right a wrong, and went so far as to say that anyone who understands the mechanism of a sneeze should understand the nature of such diseases. For just as foreign matter is violently expelled in the process of sneezing, so is waste and morbid matter expelled by the body in a set of symptoms noted by us in the many so-called diseases. Basically, the process is the same. And just as it would be absurd to try to smother the sneeze, so it is absurd to try and suppress the symptoms, which constitute the outward and visible signs of the curing processes going on in the body. He says we should aid and abet them, not hinder and prevent them. Disease itself is a process of cure. What were the measures which Troll advocated to restore the sick person to health? Not by smothering symptoms, but by removing the cause of these symptoms. What is the cause? Waste poisonous material in the system, which nature is endeavoring to expel. Today, this condition is known among health reformers as toxemia. By this, they do not mean germs or the excretion of germs, but a general condition of poisoning brought on by an excess of putrefying waste material in the bloodstream and body generally. When this is expelled, all symptoms, that is, all so-called diseases, spontaneously vanish, and the patient is cured. And now here's what George S. Wagner, MD, says in his book called What is Disease? Disease is the warning, and therefore the friend, not the enemy of mankind. It manifests itself in its various ways and forms, from a slight cold to the most severe inflammation, such for instance as pneumonia, for the sole purpose of ridding the body of accumulated poisons. The theory that the foundation of man's weaknesses and disease is self-laid by wrong habits of living is the only theory that stands the test of reason. That these habits caused to be built and stored up in the system contain certain toxic poisons is equally tenable. Disease of all kinds, then, is the secondary manifestation of the harmful influence of the insidious toxin auto-generated. Living habits can be so changed as to reduce these toxins in amount, inhibit their formation, and increase their elimination. A knowledge of the theory of toxemia and innervation permits of a clearer understanding of just how emotional stress is operative in disease and health. Overworked emotions are often directly responsible for disease and aggravate all existing pathology by acting unfavorably upon digestion, assimilation, nutrition, and all excretory functions having to do with the elimination of waste products from the body. To get well, you must stop doing that which makes you sick. I'm going to repeat that. To get well, you must stop doing that which makes you sick. How much more common sense could that be? Then he goes on to say, no disease can be successfully treated unless the surplus toxins are removed from the blood and tissues. At least 75% of all symptoms, diseases, and discomforts disappear with the removal of toxins. No one can expect full, dependable health who does not learn how to live in a manner to keep this toxemia below the saturation point. To rest the entire body and give nature a chance to heal, we should do as the animals do when sick or injured and abstain from all food until well. Thus, the energy that is ordinarily utilized in digesting and assimilating 3 meals a day is available for cleansing the system of toxins, which most of us have been gradually accumulating through years of wrong living. Above all, remember that the more you feed a diseased body, the more you feed the disease. So there you have it. Toxemia, poison that builds up in the system. You know, does this not make sense when you see and you hear about these so-called epidemics of a half a dozen people having something? You ever look around to see how many people don't have the disease? And when you do that simple observation, you soon come to a logical conclusion that things aren't caught. But yet if you take a number of people, like in Chicago, if you had 4 million people, for example, and they said that 10,000 people got a cold and we've really got flu season and everybody's catching it, is it really hard to understand that 10,000 people didn't have a saturation level of poisons, toxemia building in their system over a period of time, that those 10,000 people just happened to hit the high note and happened to go over the level of saturation and toleration, and the body is now taking excuse me, the body is now taking it into effect and saying, okay, go to bed, rest, stop eating because you lose your appetite, you don't eat anyway. You eliminate that poison from your system, and guess what? Miracles of all miracles, you get well. Health is that simple, people. It is that simple. They make it so complicated by the medical profession so they can sell you their drugs and serums and vaccines. Why do you think they tell you that you must eat 3 meals a day and breakfast is the most important? Why do you think they tell you to eat all of this stuff and that constipation, if you only go once or twice a week, that that's okay? Why do you think they tell you that not going without food for a few days will cause you to get sick and probably die? As you know, years ago they said your heart would explode if you went 7 days of fasting. These people do not want you to understand health. They do not want you to become a healthologist because it's money out of their pocket. When you understand what I understand, that health is so simple by eating limited amounts of good food, and I'm not saying to be a vegetarian, a vegan, or get fanatical about it. I personally am a 60 to 90% eating fruits and steamed vegetables, depending on the season. I do more steamed vegetables in winter and more salads in the summer along with my fruits that I have. And I'm going to tell you what I have. Basically, this is what I have. I will slice up a banana, throw in some grapes, and some raspberries, whatever 3 fruits you want, into a bowl of almond milk. I don't eat breakfast, so I usually eat this around 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. That's what I have. And before I go to work, then I have steamed vegetables. I love steamed broccoli, steamed carrots, steamed potatoes. I get organic as much as I can. And I have that before I go to work. Now, when I go to work, I own a restaurant, okay? And I don't have healthy food in the restaurant. I'm going to have salads. So, but I allow myself junk food, or I allow myself the stuff that they claim isn't good. So I have a hamburger once a week. And I have maybe a chicken sandwich or something, which a lot of people think are healthy, but there's more cholesterol in chicken, as I understand it, than there is in meat. But the point is, I have a bowl of ice cream. But I run 2 miles every day also. So I figure, hey, I'm knocking that stuff out. But the point is, you don't have to be a fanatic. If you get the level of food, proper food, 60, 80%, 90%, whatever it is, you're going to be fine. And folks, for those of you who don't know me, I'm 72 years old, 72 years young. 72 years young, haven't been to a medical doctor or any kind of doctor in 50 years. And I don't take any medications or drugs, what they call medications or drugs. Which is a point, by the way, I'm going to illustrate, because there's so much misinformation and lies out there that are produced by the drug companies. The word medicine actually means something used to make you better. And the word drug means actually something to treat. So the real definition of medication is not drugs, because they don't help you get better. It is the right food, the exercise, sunshine, fresh air, good water. These are things that are real medication. And then, of course, when you go to the Walgreens drugstore, it doesn't say Walgreens medication store on it, does it? It says drugstore or pharmacy, which comes from pharmakia. Okay? But when you go to get your drugs, they say, here's your medications. But the point is, when you have read or listened to the germs do not cause disease, and now you know that toxemia does, and when you fully understand this, you will save a ton of money. You will never go to a doctor again unless you're in an accident. You will not buy any hand sanitizers or antibacterials. You will not get any drugs when you're sick. You will not suppress your symptoms. You will be healthier. You will live longer. And you will feel so much more in control of your life. Remember, folks, build health by healthful living. I'm going to have a couple of more CDs out. I'm going to do one on fasting, so you can get the inside by the experts on that. And I'm also going to do one on the living virus lie, biggest fraud that was ever perpetrated by the people who call themselves virologists. So until the next time, this is Jim Novak's O'Kelly, healthologist. And I hope that you take the time to pass this information on to your friends, relatives, your loved ones, so that we can, in the end, fire your doctor and cure yourself. Thank you. This is recorded December the 29th in the year 2013. Have a great day.
Well, that dates me. That was 10 years ago.
Hi, this is Jim O'Kelly.
10 years ago, I was 72. And I'm still working out, still exercising every day, except I'm up to about 90% vegetarian now. But if anybody, Raven, I'll be with you in a minute. If anybody thinks about this and changes their habits to a better lifestyle, then it's been worth my time to play the CD. So you can listen to this over and over again until you get it. Okay, I'll be with you in a minute. This is Jim Jim Novak's. I call myself then because there was a fad going around at that time where everybody was calling himself Novak's. I forget the lady's name who started it, but I called myself Jimmy Novak's at that time, which was kind of cool. But anyway, dandy out. Have a great day, a safe day, and change your lifestyle for yourself.